In the end, his story faded the way most horrors do, not with a bang, but with a whisper. The town spoke of him less and less, until his name became a warning told to children, a reminder of what happens when families close their doors too tightly, when love rots into something unnatural. His house collapsed slowly after his death, wood splintering, roof caving, walls buckling under the weight of secrets too heavy to carry any longer. Nature reclaimed what was left, vines crawling over the ruins like a shroud, as though the earth itself wanted to bury the shame. But stories like his never stay buried. They linger. They move like shadows through memory, carried by whispers and unease. Because deep down, people know his tragedy was not just his. It was a reflection of what can happen anywhere when bloodlines are locked, when isolation becomes tradition, when one voice replaces all others. His life was not simply the product of inbreeding, it was the product of silence, of fear, of a love that chained instead of freed. Think about it. How many men across forgotten corners of this country lived and died the same way, hidden, malformed, not only in flesh, but in spirit, trapped by families that never let them breathe. His story is not unique. It is simply the one that slipped through the cracks long enough to be remembered. And remembering it forces us to look at what we'd rather not see, that sometimes family is not sanctuary. Sometimes family is the cage. The man who never escaped his mother remains a ghost in the American archive, not famous, not celebrated, just a shadow, a warning. His face still haunts photographs too disturbing to display, his story too grotesque to fit neatly into history books. But here, in the silence between words, he exists. A life consumed, a bloodline ended, a truth too heavy for most to hear. So if you've made it this far, you now carry him, too. And maybe that's the real curse of his story. Not that he was trapped in his mother's grasp, but that once you know about him, a part of you will never forget. His ghost lives not in the house, not in the town, not even in the ruins left behind. His ghost lives in the knowledge that sometimes the past is not gone, sometimes it is still breathing, through stories like his. When death finally came to her, it did not come quietly. The neighbors remembered the cries, long wails that stretched through the night until they stopped all at once. By the time anyone dared step onto the property, the old woman was gone, and he was alone for the first time in his life. But alone did not mean free. He stayed inside that house, even as it rotted further, even as the smell of decay drifted into the town. When officials finally came to check, they found him sitting in the dark, surrounded by piles of dirty dishes, scraps of rotted food, and clothing that hadn't been washed in years. He told them he couldn't leave. He told them she was still there, that she was waiting for him in every room. To him, her voice had not died. It lived in the walls, in the air, in the rhythm of his own heart. She had trained him so completely that even in death, she was still his keeper. What horrified them most wasn't the condition of the house, it was him. His face had twisted with age into something almost unrecognizable, the deformities of his bloodline deepened by time. His teeth were nearly gone, his jaw sagged, and his eyes, those wandering, misaligned eyes, still darted nervously as though searching for her approval. He hadn't shaved in years. His clothes clung to his body like rags. He was less a man than a relic of everything that had gone wrong in that family. And yet when they tried to move him, to take him from that place, he resisted. He clutched the doorway. He screamed for her. He sobbed like a child being torn from his mother's arms. He wasn't capable of freedom. He wasn't capable of life without her shadow. He had become the embodiment of her will, a prisoner she had built so perfectly that no key could unlock him, not even her death. The officials left him there in the end, unable to untangle him from the house that had raised and buried him, and so he stayed, wandering from room to room, speaking to a ghost that only he could hear. He wasn't the most inbred man because of his blood. He was the most inbred man because he had never escaped his mother, not in life, not in death, not ever. By the time the town began to take real notice, it was already too late. He was no longer a boy, no longer even a young man. Decades had passed, and still he lived inside that house, with only her shadow to measure time. People whispered louder now about the smell that drifted from their property, about the way he followed her through town like a dog on a leash, about the way her eyes grew wild when anyone asked too many questions. But nobody dared interfere. In small towns, silence is safer than truth. The man himself had become a shell. His shoulders caved forward, his words barely more than murmurs, his face sagging in ways that made him look far older than his years. Yet beside him, his mother remained sharp, watchful, her hand on his arm as if she feared he might vanish. But everyone knew the truth. He was never going anywhere. He had been groomed to stay, conditioned to stay, born to stay. And so the house became a tomb for the living, windows sealed, curtains yellowing with time, floors sagging with rot. What little furniture remained was covered in dust, but her rocking chair still creaked through the nights, her voice still whispering to him in the dark. She told him stories of their ancestors, of cousins who married cousins, of how they kept their blood pure. She spoke of duty, of loyalty, of how he was chosen to remain with her because no one else could understand. He believed her. He always believed her. And that belief bound him tighter than any locked door. He wasn't just inbred by blood. He was inbred by thought, unable to imagine a life without her. His world ended at the property line. His identity ended at her gaze. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have fought to escape, or would you have stayed too, trapped by the voice that raised why? Ow! Because the truth is, most of us think we'd run, but when the walls are built from birth, when love is twisted into chains, running isn't just difficult, it feels impossible. Time did not move in that house the way it did outside. For most, years meant change, birthdays, seasons, progress. But for him, years meant only repetition. The same walls, the same meals, the same voice telling him what to think, what to fear, what to love. He lived in a loop, and every loop tightened around his throat. The world outside kept advancing, but inside, he remained the boy she never allowed to grow. The deformities that marked his face became the mask of his fate. When he ventured into town, children stared and whispered, sometimes laughing before being hushed by embarrassed parents. But the adults knew better. They knew he wasn't just odd-looking. He was the last branch of a tree that should have stopped growing long ago. His family had folded into itself too many times, and he was the final result. His slurred words, his vacant stares, his twitching hands. He carried the evidence of generations that refused to let new blood in, and worse, he carried the proof that his mother would not let new blood near him now. Neighbors wondered why he never tried to leave. But escape isn't possible when you don't believe you deserve freedom. She told him every day that he was unfit for the world, that no woman would bear him children, that no friend would stay, that the world would spit him back into her arms. And after years of hearing it, he began to believe. Her voice was the air he breathed, and without it, he thought he would die. By middle age, his body began to show the strain of a life without change. His back hunched, his teeth rotted, his skin sagged with the pallor of someone who had never truly lived under sunlight. But his mother, though older now, still watched over him with an iron grip cloaked in tenderness. To outsiders, she was an aging woman caring for her disabled son, but behind closed doors the truth was darker. She wasn't caring for him. She was keeping him. And the strangest part, he didn't fight, he didn't rebel, he accepted it, because deep down he believed she was right. As the boy grew into a man, the boundaries between mother and son dissolved into something unnatural. She dressed him even when his hands were old enough to do it himself. She fed him meals not across the table, but from her own hand. And when he tried to pull away, she reminded him, softly, with a voice that could sound like love, that there was nothing beyond her. No woman would want him. No friend could be trusted. Only she would stay. Only she would keep him. Her words dug into him deeper than any chain could, and so he let her wash him, clothe him, decide for him. To outsiders, he was the strange man who never left his mother's side, but inside those walls, their bond was more suffocating, more consuming. Every attempt at independence was smothered before it could grow. She didn't just raise her son, she absorbed him, like soil swallowing water. People whispered. They whispered because they could see in his face what they dared not name. His jaw never formed right, his teeth jutted at odd angles, and his eyes wandered in opposite directions, as if they too were trying to escape. But what they didn't see, what they could never see, was the way his spirit had been folded into hers. There were no secrets between them, no boundaries. When he spoke, his words were echoes of hers. When he moved, it was with the permission of her gaze. The house grew more silent as the years passed. The arguments quieted, replaced by a strange rhythm of dependence. It was not the sound of two lives, it was the sound of one. A mother who could not let go, and a son who no longer knew where she ended, and he began. To some, this looked like devotion. To others, madness. But beneath the silence, there was something more sinister, something harder to speak aloud. He was no longer just her son, he was her possession, and possessions cannot leave. They can only decay where they are kept. The house was older than anyone living in that town could remember, built when the land was still raw, when families clung to one another in the wilderness not out of love, but survival. Its wood was blackened with time, its roof sagging as if bowed under the shame of what it had witnessed, and at its heart lived a woman who never let go of her bloodline, who believed that the walls themselves were safer than the world outside. She raised her son inside those walls like a secret, hidden, sheltered, and poisoned. They said she had once been a striking woman, but her beauty was the kind that never left the family. It circled back, generation after generation, until it had nowhere else to go. Her father was her cousin, her mother was her aunt. The family had thinned itself with repetition, and by the time she gave birth to her only child, the deformities were no longer accidents, they were inevitable. His crooked face and slurred speech were not tragedies of chance, but the final tally of a debt paid in blood. She told him stories of the outside world, but always painted them dark, that people mocked, that they hated, that they would never understand who he was. And so, he stayed. He stayed because the house was safe. He stayed because his mother needed him. But more than that, he stayed because he had no choice. By the time he was old enough to question, the only answers he trusted came from her mouth. His life was the echo of her will. Visitors who came to that house spoke of a smell, something sour, like spoiled milk mixed with rot. They noticed curtains always drawn, doors always locked, and the sound of footsteps that seemed to shuffle endlessly, as though one person was pacing and another was following. The mother explained it away with a polite smile, but behind her eyes was a warning. Don't ask too many questions. The boy never spoke when visitors came. He would stand in the corner, shoulders hunched, watching, like a shadow, like something unfinished. And when the visitors left, the curtains closed again, sealing him back into silence. This is where his story begins, but it is not where it ends, because what his mother gave him wasn't protection, it was a sentence. And soon that sentence would begin to consume him. They said he was born from shadows, but that wasn't true. He was born from a woman who could not let go, who held her son so close that he never truly left her, not even when he was grown, not even when the boy inside had long since become a man. His face carried the unmistakable signs of a family tree folded back on itself, eyes that never aligned, a jaw that seemed unfinished, and a forehead stretched wider than nature intended. Every stranger who crossed him felt the same unease, as if they were staring at something humanity wasn't meant to make. But what made him most disturbing wasn't how he looked, it was how he lived. In a small, forgotten corner of America, he spent his life inside a house that was never silent. Every whisper of the wind through broken shutters, every creak of the rotting floorboards seemed to echo with her voice, his mother's voice. She kept him there, fed him, clothed him, told him who he was and who he could never be. There was no escape, not for him, not for her. Their blood had already sealed the lock. Neighbors recalled strange sounds at night, long conversations, arguments that rose and fell like the tides, but no one ever saw another man enter that home. He was the only male presence, the only child she had carried, and she carried him still, not on her back, not in her arms, but in her grip on his mind. He would walk into town sometimes, his clothes hanging from his frame, eyes darting like an animal too long in a cage. But he always returned to her. Always. The story of his life is not just about one man trapped by blood and bone. It is the story of what happens when family becomes prison, when a mother's love decays into possession, and when escape is not only impossible, but unthinkable. This was not just inbreeding of flesh, this was inbreeding of the soul, and to understand how he became the most inbred man who never escaped his MOs. There, we must begin with the house itself, because in that house the walls held more than dust. They held the weight of secrets that even now, after all these years, feel too heavy to tell.